If you've ever played Cairn, you know that the feeling of scaling a mountain while managing every detail of your survival is something few games can replicate. But the On the Trail Deepwater DLC didn't just arrive to expand the map. It came to change how you think about risk, water, and your limits within the game. That's why I went deep to bring you the 10 updates about this DLC that will make all the difference in your gameplay. I'm Matthew, and the video is about to start. You know that feeling when a character who was always just there in the background, giving a quick tip or pointing the way, suddenly becomes the center of attention? That's exactly what I felt when I learned that Marco, Cairn's old support NPC, will be playable in this DLC. Personally, I've always seen him as that silent, reliable figure. The friend who lends you a carabiner when you forget yours, without ever being in the spotlight. Now, taking control and seeing him scale those sea cliffs, it's like discovering your climbing partner has a whole lifetime of stories you've never heard. Playing as Marco, the entire experience changes tone. While the original protagonist seems to carry that air of a determined loner, imagine Marco with a different set of skills, perhaps more focused on efficiency, using less energy in movements, or even with homemade gear that reflects his long-standing support role. This isn't just a skin swap, it's an invitation to relearn climbing through a new lens. And you know what's most interesting? The areas we already know, like the Haken overhangs, might feel totally different through his eyes. Maybe he knows a shortcut the main character never noticed, or a way to handle the water that reveals something about his past. Speaking of the past, this gameplay opens a window for us to understand why Marco is always there. Why does he never give up on supporting us, even when conditions are brutal? Maybe playing as him, we'll discover he has a personal debt to that coast, or that he lost someone in a similar fall and now climbing is a way of coping. It transforms him from a simple guide into someone with layers, and suddenly, every time he appeared in the base game saying, "Watch out for that hold," it starts to have much more emotional weight. It's that kind of detail that makes you go back to the old game with a new respect for what previously seemed like mere functionality. In the end, this change isn't just about adding another character option, it's about deepening the bond we already had with the world of Cairn. The On the Trail Deepwater DLC already gave us reasons to climb with more freedom thanks to water soloing. And now it gives us a reason to see that same freedom through another perspective, perhaps more human, more connected to the details, the game always hid in seemingly small interactions. If you've ever caught yourself looking at Marco and wondering, what's his story? This is your chance to find out. And let's be honest, after so much time relying on him to survive on the walls, it makes total sense to want to lace up his climbing shoes and go up alongside him for a bit. In the midst of a DLC so focused on cliffs, the sea, and outdoor climbing, I found it very interesting to see Cairn adding the Lamu climbing gym area, because this completely shifts the energy of the experience. Instead of that feeling of raw nature trying to beat you all the time, the proposal here seems more concentrated, more technical, almost like a space where the game challenges you to think through every movement with more calm. What draws my attention most to this type of area is precisely the idea of climbing problems. It's not just about going up, it's about figuring out how to go up. Which hold holds better, which sequence makes sense, where is it worth spending strength, and where is it better to reposition your body before pushing on. This gives everything a more cerebral air, and honestly, I really like it when Cairn leans into this side where climbing feels less like a race against a fall and more like a physical puzzle. I also think the Lamu climbing gym could work very well as a contrast within the DLC. While the coastal areas convey that sense of freedom, risk, and improvisation, the gym seems to bring a more controlled, almost clinical challenge. And that's great because it shows the expansion doesn't want to rely solely on the visual novelty of the water or the suspended cliffs. It also wants to offer situations where the player needs to refine technique, understand movement better, and truly master the system. To me, this kind of addition makes the DLC richer than if it just brought pretty new scenery. A climbing gym with fresh challenges suggests content designed for those who like to test limits, repeat attempts, improve execution, and feel real progression. It's the kind of update that might not grab as much attention in the first announcement, as a sea cliff, but it could end up being one of the most interesting parts for those who truly enjoy Cairn's core gameplay. Man, if you've played Cairn, you know that one of the tensest things about the game is that constant feeling that one mistake could be your last. Every movement on the rocks carries weight, every decision matters, and death is always a very real possibility. So imagine when Cairn announced the DLC with a mechanic called water soloing. My first reaction was exactly this. Finally. Water soloing allows you to climb cliffs that sit directly over the sea, and the big game changer here is that falling into the water doesn't mean death. It sounds simple when you say it like that, but think about what that represents within the game's philosophy. Cairn has always been about accepting risk and calculating every step. Now, there is a type of terrain where you can mess up, fall into the ocean, and keep trying. It's almost like the game is taking a deep breath and saying, it's okay, you can explore this one with more freedom. What excites me most about this is the design potential it opens up. Imagine coastal cliffs specifically built to challenge you in different ways, where the danger isn't the immediate end, but perhaps getting back to the right spot after falling, or the accumulated fatigue. Water as a safety net creates a completely different rhythm of climbing, bolder, more experimental, almost like a training park within a world that usually doesn't forgive you. And honestly, I think this DLC could be the perfect entry point for those who always wanted to play Cairn but were afraid of the punishment level. Water soloing doesn't break the game. It just adds a layer where you can learn to climb with slightly fewer fatal consequences. It's a tough balance to strike, and it seems like the developers understood exactly where to place this escape valve. Anyone who knows Cairn knows the game doesn't play around. A fall is a fall, and the consequences are brutal and definitive. This coldness is part of the game's identity, that feeling that the mountain doesn't care about you and never will. So when the DLC arrives announcing that falling in the new areas is no longer an instant game over, it's impossible not to stop and think, this changes everything. The idea is straightforward. You fall into the water, swim, and try again. No death screen, no starting from zero, no frustration of losing progress over a slip of a few millimeters. And look, I know it might sound like the game is getting easier, but I don't see it that way. What this mechanic does is trade the type of tension. Instead of being afraid of making a mistake and dying, you're now afraid of making a mistake and losing time, losing energy, and losing positioning. The challenge doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. What impresses me is how this reflects a very conscious design decision. The developers didn't just place water as a random backdrop, they used the environment as a natural second chance, something that makes sense within the game world. Falling into the sea is different from falling onto a rock. The physics, the logic, and the emotional feeling of each fall change completely. You'll still feel that pit in your stomach the moment you slip, but now followed by a sigh of relief. And for those who have always admired Cairn from afar, but never had the courage to dive in because of the severe punishment, this DLC feels like a genuine invitation. It's not a light version of the game. It's a version that gives you room to fail at certain moments without losing everything. It's the game recognizing that not every risk needs to cost everything, and sometimes just costing time and one more attempt is punishment enough. Haken and Ruka. The names alone sound like real places. Those remote cliffs that show up in professional climbers' Instagram photos with Norwegian captions. And the DLC doesn't just bring these two. There are 3 new areas in total, each built around the coastal environment that defines this expansion. The detail that changes everything in these new locations is the overhanging section suspended over the water. Think about what it's like to climb a negative wall in Cairn normally. That moment when gravity seems to want to rip you off the rock. Now, place the ocean directly beneath you while that happens. The visuals change, the pressure changes, even the way you breathe during the climb changes. It's not just aesthetics, it's an extra layer of psychological discomfort that the game utilizes very well. 3 areas might seem like a small number, but those who know Cairn know that quantity isn't the point. Every stretch of rock here is built with intention. Every hold has a reason for being where it is. These new environments were clearly designed alongside the non-fatal fall mechanic. Overhangs over water make much more sense in a DLC where falling isn't the end, because the wall then dares you to try moves you would normally avoid. What sticks in my mind is that Haken and Ruka seem like places you'll want to master, not just complete. In Cairn, there's that thing about returning to a wall that defeated you and climbing it differently, cleaner, more efficiently. With 3 new coastal areas and this freedom to experiment more, the DLC seems designed specifically to cultivate that kind of relationship between the player and the environment. You know when you're on a negative wall in Cairn and you already feel your forearms screaming for help. Now imagine that, but with the sea crashing right below you as you struggle not to fall. That is exactly the proposal of the focus on overhangs over water in the DLC. And my first reaction upon reading this was a mix of, wow, what a perfect idea, and my God, I'm going to die trying, because climbing a roof is already brutal, but doing it knowing that a slip doesn't kill you, it just sends you into the ocean, creates a totally different kind of tension. It's no longer just about not falling. It's about being able to reach the top before your muscles shut down completely. The cliffs of Haken and Ruka seem to have been sculpted specifically for this type of challenge. When they say suspended overhangs over water, they aren't kidding. We're talking about sections where you are literally upside down with the ocean right in your line of sight, that deep blue blinking between your legs as you search for the next hold. And the worst, or best, depending on your player masochism, is that the water down there isn't just scenery. It changes your perception of risk. You know you can fall, and that both makes you bolder to try that bizarre move, and makes you think twice before spending too much energy on a risky dynamic. Because falling here doesn't kill you, sure, but it leaves you swimming back to the base, wasting precious minutes of stamina that you might not have to spare. That's where the total route freedom comes in. In Cairn, you sometimes get stuck in a single sequence that the developer clearly expected you to follow. But with these overhangs designed for water, it seems there are multiple ways to handle the same section. Maybe a more direct path that requires raw finger strength, another that's worth a huge swing to save forearms, or even a technical crawl along the edges that takes longer but preserves your resources. This freedom is a gift and a trap at the same time. The more options you see, the easier it is to get stuck trying to find the perfect route while your stamina clock hits 0. It's exactly the kind of dilemma that makes you scream at the screen on one attempt and laugh relieved on the next. At the end of the day, this focus on overhangs over water seems to be the pure essence of what makes this DLC special. It's not just about adding new cliffs. It's about taking one of the most feared elements of climbing in Cairn, the overhang, and putting it in a context where the environment itself encourages you to play with the limit. Knowing you have a kinda sorta cushion underneath. Remember when I talked about water soloing being an entry point for new players? This right here is the opposite. It's an invitation for veterans to buckle up and test how far their endurance really goes, but with the difference that now you can fail, learn, and try again without having to restart the whole thing from 0. It's that classic Cairn mix. Fair punishment rewarded with that sigh of relief when you finally nail the sequence and put your feet on the summit, looking out at the sea knowing you earned every second of it. You know that feeling when you're climbing a remote wall and you find an old rusted piton driven into the rock decades ago? Or a bootlace caught in a crack almost disappearing under the moss? In Cairn, these details were always silent. Bits of history the game let you imagine on your own. Now, with On the Trail bringing an explicit narrative about following the footsteps of a legendary climber, it's as if that feeling of finding traces of the past has gained a voice, a direction, and a beating heart. What hooks me on this idea isn't just the promise of discovering secrets, but how it transforms the act of climbing into something almost archaeological. Before, you climbed because the wall was there, because the challenge demanded your full attention. Now, every hold you test, every ledge you examine, carries an extra layer of intent. Was this the path he took? Was this crack in the rock used by him to shelter from the wind? It's a subtle but profound shift. Suddenly, the mountain is no longer just an obstacle to be overcome, but a witness that holds stories. And you are learning to read it. I think a lot about the specific locations we already know from the DLC, the Haken overhangs, the Ruka walls, even the Lamu climbing gym. Imagine finding a piton with nearly faded inscriptions on a negative ledge in Haken, or an old torn backpack snagged on a tree near the coastal area with an illegible note inside. These wouldn't just be Easter eggs, they would be pieces of a puzzle that the game finally gives you the context to assemble. And the most powerful thing would be if these discoveries didn't come in canned cutscenes, but through objects, scratches in the rock, perhaps even subtle changes in lighting or sound when you pass a certain point, maintaining Cairn's respect for letting the player feel the discovery rather than being fed it. This narrative layer seems to be the gift that veteran Cairn players perhaps didn't know we wanted. The game has always been magnificent in its scarcity, in making you project meaning onto the silence. But there is a special power in knowing that behind those sea cliffs, there is a human story of courage, obsession, or perhaps tragedy that you are about to touch with your fingertips. It doesn't turn Cairn into something it isn't. It simply allows us to climb not just with our bodies, but also with our curiosity. And then when you finally find that last clue, that detail that makes everything make sense, the relief isn't just from having conquered the climb. It's from having managed to hear, after all this time, what the mountain was trying to say all along. One thing I really liked about this DLC is that it doesn't seem to want to stay trapped only in its own closed content. Knowing that the new areas and the two characters, Ava and Marco, also become available in free roam mode on Mount Kami immediately gives me the feeling of a true expansion. The kind that integrates into the game rather than staying isolated as an extra you play once and forget. To me, this kind of decision makes a big difference because the free exploration mode is precisely where many people create a more personal relationship with the game. It's the space to test routes, observe the scenery, experiment with movements, and simply enjoy the climb without that pressure of following a specific objective all the time. So putting the new areas into this mode means the DLC doesn't just add content, it increases the possibilities of how you experience Cairn on a daily basis. And having Ava and Marco available in this context makes everything even more interesting. It's not just a visual swap, it's a genuine change in perspective. Sometimes, just the fact of exploring the same mountain with another character already completely changes the atmosphere of the experience, almost as if Mount Kami takes on another personality. I really like when a game allows this kind of freedom, because you start creating your own moments instead of just consuming what was prepared in a linear fashion. This update gives me a very good impression of longevity. The new areas aren't just for the DLC campaign, and the characters aren't stuck to a specific piece of content. All of this goes together into free roam, which is exactly where a lot of good things happen organically. It's the kind of addition that might seem simple in the announcement, but in practice, it can be one of the most valuable for those who like to return to the game and keep exploring at their own pace. This might be the most exciting news of everything that was announced and almost went unnoticed amidst so many new mechanics and interesting areas. Deepwater is not an isolated DLC. It is the first in a series of free updates called On the Trail, which will be released throughout 22.6, and the most important detail, free. To me, this completely changes the context of how to view everything we've talked about so far. Think carefully about what this means in practice. Every update we saw, water soloing, the Haken and Ruka overhangs, Marco as a playable character, the Lamu climbing gym, the legendary climber narrative, all of that is just the beginning. The developers are clearly building something bigger, a series of expansions being revealed in parts, each likely with its own theme, its own mechanics, and perhaps even new characters and stories. Deepwater has all the markings of a well-planned foundation, not a finished project. What impresses me here is the confidence this demonstrates in the Cairn player base. Releasing high-quality free content over an entire year is a considerable bet, and it indicates that the developers want to keep the community active and engaged without creating a financial barrier for every new feature. It's not something every indie studio has the courage to do, especially with a game as technical and niche as this. It's a sign of respect for the audience that invested in the game from the start. And look, I have a certain special affection for developers who treat post-launch with this seriousness. Cairn was already a game that was worth a lot for what it offered. Knowing that throughout 2026 it will continue to grow, adding perspectives, locations, and new stories without costing anything extra is the kind of news that makes you want to keep the game installed and return frequently just to see what has arrived. Deepwater opened the doors, and now the question is simply, what will the On the Trail series show us next? The statement that the On the Trail Deepwater DLC still holds secrets that will be revealed little by little is exactly the kind of thing that sticks in your mind. It's not an empty marketing teaser coming from a studio that clearly thinks through every detail of Cairn with care. This phrase carries real weight. When they say some surprises, I believe they are real surprises. What makes me most curious is that the stated focus remains the realistic feeling of climbing, but with more variety and replayability. This is a very specific direction to choose to emphasize. They didn't say more content or more hours of gameplay. They said variety and replayability, words that speak directly to those who already know and love the core of Cairn. It suggests that the surprises won't alter the game's DNA, but will expand the ways to experience it. And to me, that's the right promise. I think about the possibilities and get genuinely excited. It could be new scoring systems, new weather conditions on the routes, perhaps even co-op mechanics or time challenges that encourage repeating known areas in different ways. Replayability in Cairn is a delicate thing, because the game by nature already invites you to redo routes and improve execution. So any addition in this direction needs to respect and enrich that rhythm, not break it. In the end, what the Game Bakers is doing with On the Trail as a series is building a long-term relationship with those who play. Surprises revealed gradually, free updates throughout 2026, a focus on replayability. All of this points to a studio that doesn't want you to play Cairn once and close it. They want you to come back, explore differently, and discover something new every time. And honestly, with the level of quality they've already demonstrated so far, I'm completely willing to trust this process and wait for what comes next.